Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Hello, everybody. Hello to all of the teachers from around the world who are joining us today in our Facebook Live session. Welcome to everybody. Please write us in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from, what part of the world, what country, what city, where you are watching us from. Please share in the chat, okay? Today, we're going to talk about an interesting topic, which is lessons in listening, developing the skill with your students. So welcome, everybody. Hello, Jacqueline. Nice to see you. Hello, everybody who's joining us today. Okay, let's get started right away. So in today's agenda, we have to start a little bit of theory, because all of these webinars in the past 6 months have been centered on second language acquisition theory. So we're going to go over a little bit of theory first. Then we'll look at creating listening activities, how to create our own and how to work with them. And then we'll take a look at some free resources that we can use for listening. So hello to everybody. Hello to Bellido in Trujillo in Peru. Hello to Chelsea from Michigan. That's so cool, Chelsea. I'm from Chicago. I've been to Michigan several times. That's awesome. Daniel, welcome. Hello to Peru. Hello, Danny from Morocco. Awesome. It's so exciting to have people from all over the world joining us today. Okay, let's start then with a little bit of theory. Why is it important to know a little bit of theory? Because theory is science, right? And science helps us to understand the best ways to work with language teaching in our classrooms, right? If we can use second language acquisition theory as a base for the activities that we develop and use in our classroom, then we'll be in good shape. So let's think about this for a moment. How do we acquire our first language? Think about how we acquire our first language. What have your experiences been? Or if you know little children who are now acquiring their first language, what is that experience like? Does anyone sit with the children and say, we conjugate verbs like this? No, right? What do? We hear our language. People speak to us in comprehensible ways with simple language. We talk to children slowly with really fluctuating intonation, simple morphosyntax, simple vocabulary, right? Listening first, exactly. Just like Loan is telling us, listening first, that's right. We listen first. So this is a skill that we actually develop from very little, and our brains are already programmed to receive language in that way, right? Okay, let's take a look at the 3 main theories of listening that exist that we've seen, right? So we have cognitive, schema, and input and interaction. In the cognitive theory, we have this is the mental process where learners construct meaning. Listening is a mental process, right? So we have basically 2 different approaches. We have the bottom-up approach and we have the top-down approach. What does that mean? The bottom-up approach means that we start with phonemes, so like the smallest units of sound in a language, right? And we put those phonemes together to build words, and then we put those words together to build sentences, right? That's the bottom-up approach. So we go from the most minimal to the bigger units, right? And the top-down then is the opposite. So we use background knowledge that we already have, right, about whatever topic we're listening to, yeah? And we use that to kind of predict what we will hear. Yeah, so if we're going to do a listening about a wedding, for example, we already kind of have some ideas about what a wedding is. So with those ideas, we can predict what we're going to hear in the listening, and we use that to fill in gaps. So we process the listening as well, but not phoneme by phoneme, yeah? Okay. The schema theory deals with something called schemata, which is the plural of schema, right? Schemata are basically mental frameworks that help organize and interpret information. Their activation is encouraged by using something that we call pre-listening tasks. And we're going to look at how to develop those tasks in a little bit. But basically, schemata is this background knowledge that we have about whatever it is in life that we're listening to. So if, for example, we have a listening about the 4th of July, which is the United States Independence Day, right? Even if we don't live in the United States or we're not exposed to the culture of the 4th of July, we still have some type of schema in our brains about what is Independence Day in general. What does that usually entail in many countries around the world? In Peru, in Ecuador, in Bolivia, in Argentina, usually there are parades, some kind of celebration, flags. We have that all as part of our schema, right? So we can use that schema to help us process the listening. And then lastly, we have the input interaction model it deals more specifically with language acquisition itself. So this is something we can attribute mostly to Dr. Stephen Krashen, right, who made his contribution through the input hypothesis and saying oral input, we need it to be just above the learner's level. Krashen refers to this as I plus 1. I is everything that the learner already has in his or her implicit linguistic system in the language that they are acquiring, plus 1 new element. So maybe this is a new grammar structure, maybe this is a new set of vocabulary, right? And it's very important in Krashen's model that we process input that we receive, in this case, what we hear, right? For meaning. It's very important that we know that our students are processing meaning, yeah? And this input interaction situation also allows for opportunities for negotiation of meaning. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the term negotiation of meaning, but this is the idea that if our students don't understand a word or a phrase, they have the opportunity to interact and say, what does this mean? No? Or can you explain this? When there's something that they don't understand. And then the teacher, in this case, can say, sure, this means this, or they give a definition, or they use realia, etc., right? Okay, so that's the model of input and interaction. What are some practical applications of these theories? So we can use what we call a balanced approach to listening. What does that mean? Effective teaching of listening skills requires integrating both bottom-up and top-down strategies. Start with easier tasks that focus on sound recognition and build towards more complex comprehension activities, right? Obviously, always being aware of the level of language of our students. Interactive learning. Encourage interaction through pair work and discussion to give students opportunities for active listening and, like we just mentioned, negotiation of meaning, right? Okay. Authenticity and comprehensible input. Use authentic materials, but ensure they provide comprehensible input appropriate at the learner's level. Authentic material is something that's becoming very popular. In a previous webinar, when we talked about reading, I shared with you some resources that are free online open libraries that use authentic material, meaning material that native speakers of a language would work with. So in this case, for example, children's stories, right? If I work with children's stories, that's authentic material because little kids who are native speakers of English also work with the same type of material. So we can use stories, but the audio version for listening if we want to develop the skill of listening, right? Okay. Moving on, we're going to talk about creating listening activities. And in this part, I would really enjoy to get some feedback from you and enjoy some ideas of what types of listening activities you have worked with your students and you consider have been successful. Okay, so please feel free to share with us in the chat. So if we look at the types of listening activities we can do in the classroom, we can divide them into 2 main categories, which are collaborative and non-collaborative. Right? Collaborative means the listener is also a speaker. So in this case, for example, we can use conversations or group interactions, etc. Anytime where the listener is also able to, quote unquote, actively participate. Right? Although listening is not such a passive skill because we have to be actively engaged in the listening, right? And then we have non-collaborative. In the case of non-collaborative activities, the listener doesn't speak. So this can be an example of a radio broadcast, a lecture, for example, a podcast, anything where the student simply receives the listening and doesn't respond by speaking, okay? And this is where I would like to see, what types do you do with your students? Comment in the chat. Do you usually work with collaborative listening activities, or do you usually work with non-collaborative? If you have a language laboratory in your institution, maybe you work with non-collaborative a lot, right? So Robert tells us, I prefer collaborative. Students participate more. Absolutely. Kevin, thank you. Creating shared class stories using TPRS. Awesome. Bellido says collaborative, working with collaborative. Good. Jimena also collaborative. So we're basically working listening and speaking at the same time, right? It seems like. This is great. Next month, we're going to talk about working on the skill of speaking. So this will be good. Okay. If we're going to create our own listening activities, or if we're going to use an audio we have, but we want to develop it more into a complete listening activity, it is very important to start with a pre-listening activity first. Yeah. Why do we do pre-listening activities? It says here that they are necessary to activate schemata. Remember, we spoke about schemata earlier, and maximize learners' comprehension. If we do pre-listening activities, then we already give the students a context so that they can receive the listening with already a schema activated in their brains about whatever the context is of the listening, right? Pre-listening activities fall into 3 general groups. Of course, there can be more, but generally we'll see one of these 3 types of activities: vocabulary preparation, review of existing knowledge, or anticipation of content. When would we want to use vocabulary preparation? When we anticipate that there's going to be an audio that our students are going to be lacking vocabulary for, right? If they don't have a lot of the vocabulary that's going to be heard in the audio, it's better if we preview the vocabulary so that they are not overwhelmed when they actually do the listening. So we can select some keywords that we know our students don't know. Now, if the majority of the audio contains words that students do know, maybe we won't choose vocabulary preparation for that pre-listening activity, right? Review of existing knowledge. If I'm going to do a listening activity about, like I mentioned, the 4th of July, Independence Day in the United States, I might review existing knowledge by having students brainstorm specific words, phrases, ideas that are related to Independence Day, right? So I live in Quito, Ecuador. And in Ecuador, Independence Day is the 10th of August. So I can tell the students, okay, think about the context that you know already. Think about this celebration here. What words can you think of? And at this same time that I'm generating a schema for them, I'm also seeing what type of vocabulary and grammar they already can do it related to the topic, right? The words they already know. So they might say parades, fireworks, flags, etc., right? And then we can do an anticipation of content. If I give them the title of a listening and I say the listening's title is this, for example, A Day in the University, what do you think the conversation is going to be about? Anticipate it. This is also activating schema because you're thinking, what do I imagine in the context of a university? Students, cafeteria, classes, teaching, lectures, et cetera, right? What types of activities? As far as structure, we can do true, false, matching, multiple choice, fill in the blank, short answer. Again, please go ahead and comment in the chat and let us know what types of activities you are working with. Hello, those of you who are just joining us. Matilde, hello. Welcome. Hello, Maru. Congratulations on participating in that course. That's really exciting. That's great. Yeah, so share what types of pre-listening activities you work with in your classrooms. What do you like to do? Class discussions, short quizzes, etc. Okay. Matching using Quizlet, says Bellido. That's good. Very nice. Okay. While listening, while the students are listening, before we even press play on the recording or whatever we're using, it's super important that the students are relaxed. Why do we say this? Because a lot of times listening is a skill that really stresses students out. And why does it stress them out? Because most of the time they think I only have one chance and I have to absorb all of the information. I can only listen one time, or I can only listen 2 times. And they think that the people are going to talk fast and they won't understand the accent. They're very stressed a lot of times, right? So make sure that your students are relaxed when they're going to do the listening. Relax, guys, enjoy this, right? Listen to the conversation, etc. Okay? So there are different ways we can approach listening, right? We can listen for gist, for example. So we can start by having students listen for the general overall meaning, not for every detail, but the overall meaning, right? This helps them to understand the overall message without getting bogged down in details. This is a good phrasal verb, bogged down, right? Without feeling like, I didn't hear exactly what time they said they would be at the cafeteria. No, first we're going to get the general idea, right? Then we can listen for specific information. So when we play the audio for them again, then we could say, okay, this time I want you to look for specific information. If they have the list of comprehension questions in front of them, they can read the questions before listening to it a second time, so that they're already aware of what specific information they are listening for in the recording, right? So the second or third time, ask students to focus on specific details like dates, names, facts, whatever appears in the comprehension questions that you have for them, those details, right? Pause and repeat. If the audio is long and complex, pause periodically to check comprehension or allow students to discuss what they've heard. In real life, when we have a conversation, many times we can pause the conversation. We could say, excuse me, I'm sorry, one moment, please. Can you repeat that? I didn't quite understand you, right? There's usually opportunity for this, which is good. So when they're doing the listening, we can try to simulate that opportunity for them. We can pause it. This also brings down their anxiety while doing the listening, knowing that they have a moment to breathe and to process what they're hearing, right? And then last, I put here a variety of accents. Expose students to different accents from different dialects of English, right? I personally would suggest that we do this a little bit later on in their studies, not from the very beginning, because from the very beginning, they're just trying to process all of the phonemes in English. And if their native language is Spanish, for example, in Spanish, we have 5 vowel sounds, right? But in English, depending on the dialect of English that is spoken, we have somewhere between 14 and 18 different vowel sounds, depending on the dialect. That's a lot. Right? So if we immediately expose students to all different accents, it's very difficult for them to find like a prototype. So from the beginning, it's usually easier if we stick to one accent, one general accent. So North American English, British English, Australian English, South African English, whichever one, but some kind of standard, let's say, so that they can get the hold of the phonemes and then later on expose them to different varieties of English, right? We're going to look at an interactive map that can do this for us in a little bit. Okay. So that's while listening. Let's see what we're saying in the chat. Carlos says, I make my students learn song lyrics to sing. They love doing it. Absolutely. Kids love music. All kids, all ages, right? So if they learn simple songs or if they learn pop songs or whatever, they certainly love working with music. That's a great way to work with listening, even though it's important to recognize that speaking and singing obviously are not exactly the same. So sometimes even for native speakers, we think we understand the lyrics of a song and we realize that we actually don't, right? So sometimes songs can be challenging, but they're really fun and entertaining for our students. We can work with a web page, speaking of songs, called Lyrics Training. Lyricstraining.com is like a karaoke, interactive karaoke, where you type in the lyrics to the song that are missing. That's also very fun for our students if you have internet connectivity. Maru says, listening for me is interesting because it's a little difficult listening to speak, but not impossible. Thank you for making, okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your comment. Yes, listening is challenging for all of us. Even for us as teachers, sometimes the skill of listening is challenging. And even as native speakers, it can be challenging to understand what we hear. I remember a personal experience when I was living and studying in Paris, and I lived with 4 Irish students. And one of them was from a small town in Ireland. And it was so difficult for me to understand her English. And she was a native speaker of English like me, but her accent was very different from what I had been exposed to. So it was a challenge, and it was fascinating for me to try to understand her. So sometimes even as native speakers, we have challenging moments in listening, right? Okay. Let's take a look at the post-listening activities, right? So during post-listening, we have different things that we can work with. First of all, and this is usually the focus of most teachers, are the comprehension questions, right? We can use as questions to assess their understanding. Mixed multiple choice, true, false, short answer, open-ended questions, etc. Right? This is all to see if they actually processed what they heard in the listening, yeah? We can ask them to summarize the listening. Ask students to summarize what they've heard either verbally or in writing. Of course, then we're working with another skill, right? But here is an interesting point about the summarized technique. There are some teachers nowadays who choose to use translanguaging for this part. What is translanguaging? When we switch to the student's first language, in this case, for a small period of time or for a very specific task. And this kind of makes sense if you think about it, because in the case of summarizing a listening, I listen to it in English, right? So in that case, I'm really isolating the skill of listening. If I ask my students to summarize what they heard in their first language and they write it, I know that I have isolated the skill of listening in English because their writing is now in Spanish or whatever other first language, Arabic. Some people are joining us from Arabic-speaking countries. Whatever their first language is, right? So in that sense, I'm kind of doing a good thing in just focusing on the skill of listening, not on the skill of writing, because they can transmit that information from the listening in their first language. So this is also an option that exists if you decide it's appropriate for your students, right? Discussions. Engage students in a discussion based on the listening material. This reinforces listening and allows them to practice speaking. Of course, if they have the level of language to be able to have a discussion. It's really important, and this we will talk about next month when we talk about speaking. It's important to not push our students to produce English beyond their level of capability, because that also causes a lot of anxiety, raises their affective filters, and it becomes really complicated for them. So if your students are at a level of English that they can engage in a discussion about the listening, awesome. But if they're not there yet, maybe we don't want to push that too hard, right? And lastly, and this is something that oftentimes we teachers leave out of listening, is the assimilation task. The assimilation phase of listening is after the comprehension. Okay, they've done the pre-listening, they listened, they did the comprehension. Did they understand the listening? Great. That's it. No, we can go one step further and do an assimilation phase. And in the assimilation phase, we essentially take what they understood from the listening and connect it somehow to their lives or to something else, right? So it links the listening activity with other skills such as writing or speaking. We can ask them to develop a role play based on the listening. We can ask them to develop a sequel to continue the listening if it's appropriate, right? For example, if we're doing the listening about Independence Day, we can have them do a Venn diagram and compare Independence Day in my country, Independence Day in the United States. What do we have in common? What is different, etc., where they assimilate everything that they've learned from the listening with what they already knew, or what connects with them. And this is very productive for our students, for them to make that connection. And it's also a great opportunity in the case of Independence Day, right, to teach culture. Listening is a great opportunity to teach culture. We can hear different accents. We can hear native speakers speaking about their traditions in their part of the world. It's an awesome opportunity to work with culture. So you can combine culture and listening together, right? Okay, I think, yes, and we're still commenting. Thank you for your comments in the chat. Matilde says music is powerful. Music is powerful in a lot of ways. I agree with you. Follow-up questions are great, says Athenas. Yes, thank you. Yes, for sure. Yolanda likes using games to check listening comprehension. Great. I have students work in teams. Working in teams is really good because it creates solidarity, and it's not only about competition between each other, but they create solidarity in their teams. So that's really nice. That's good. Bedido asks a very important question. I'm sorry, Teresa asks a very important question in the chat. What if they are basic level students? I think this is a question that a lot of us have. The more basic the level, the more simple the language, right? So we need to take our language and simplify it a lot. So let's say that you find a script somewhere for a listening that you like a lot. You like the topic, right? And you have the script, but you think that it's too advanced for your students. We can use AI, ChatGPT, copy a script, paste it, and say, simplify this script to A1 level on the Common European Framework of Reference. And ChatGPT will simplify the language for you. And you can work with the same topic that you liked, but with language that is more appropriate for the level of the students, right? We also have to remember to keep the language very, very basic and maybe short sentences. If they're basic level, we can't really go beyond simple present, simple vocabulary, sentences that are 4 or 5 words long, and start with individual sentences. We can't ask basic students to process a whole monologue from a news report because that's way above their level, right? So that's the best strategy we can use, is to simplify the language that our students are working with, right? Okay, yes. Agustin says something that listening is the least developed skill in the classroom. This is because, unfortunately, not every teacher is able to use oral skills properly. It must be for every English teacher to develop these oral skills and how to teach them. Yes, some of us as teachers still need to develop our listening skills as well. Luckily, we have access to the internet and to a plethora of opportunities to develop that ear, to tune our ear to English, right? As a recommendation to teachers who want to improve their English skills, find something that you like. For example, if any of you like to cook, put on a YouTube video about cooking. You put it on in the background, even if you are busy cleaning things or doing other things, and you just have the audio in the background. Our brains are capable of naturally processing that language, right? Naturally starting to parse, which means separate into comprehensible pieces, the language. So you can do that in your free time, because I know we teachers don't have a lot of free time, right? But you can put that on in the background about any topic you like. It doesn't need to be about English grammar, about something you are interested in. Give your students the same opportunity. Hey guys, here's a list of podcasts. I want you to pick one that you are interested in and listen to it this weekend, right? Give them the opportunity to have that contact with authentic language, authentic material, right? Okay. Yes, Maru says, always practice my listening. That's good, with songs. Yes, those are some of the classics. Maru, in fact, sometimes we like to get together as teachers on a Facebook page and have karaoke sessions together online from all over the world. Maybe we can share those opportunities with you so that we can join and sing these songs together as teachers. We have a lot of fun. Okay, a lot of people are mentioning music. Absolutely. Scaffolding, Carlos says, which is always important. Scaffolding. Yes. Athena says a Venn diagram, precisely a good way to assimilate all the information to make that comparison. Exactly. Kevin, focusing on super 6 high frequency verbs with beginners. Good. Very exactly. The words that we use most commonly. Good tip. Thank you, Kevin. Okay. Okay. So let's continue. Tips to maximize listening in the classroom. This is besides the days that you are working with the specific skill of listening, because one thing is working with the skill of listening specifically, and another is fine-tuning their ears to English, right? So we can do a couple things to help us. And here I would like you to also add your ideas in the chat. What do you do to work with listening, maximize listening in the classroom? Use the L2 to conduct business. Announcements, for example. You have an important announcement, you say it in English, simply, right? And then you can say, can someone tell me what I just said? Can someone repeat, in other words, what I just said to make sure that they're understanding it, right? Okay. Allow learners to suggest topics and to control discourse. Why does it always have to be you as the teacher who determines the topics for the students? Why don't you flip that role and say to them, hey, what would you like to listen about? Besides music, we know music, yes, for sure. But what topics would be interesting for you? And have your students tell you. Have your students even sometimes bring in the material that they want to listen to. Yeah, have them take an active role in the topics that they are involved in. Okay. 3, set aside phone time. Phone time. Have them send messages to each other via WhatsApp. Audio messages so they can listen to each other, right? A lot of times it's very stressful for us to use the phone in our second language. It was stressful for me for years to do it in Spanish until you get more practice. So if the students can use their self, okay, now send each other WhatsApp messages, yeah? Provide good gambits. What do we mean by gambits? Gambits are units of language, pieces of language for listening. So for example, what types of pieces of language are important? Can you please repeat that? Could you say that again? I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Excuse me, could you say that again? Something like that, right? These chunks of language we can present to our students as units, not a word for word, subject, verb, object, but as a unit. Here, if you don't understand something, you can use these options to clarify with someone, right? Okay. Yes, Teresa asks another important question. When using WhatsApp, would it be better to do it in a group? That's really your choice. I think one-to-one works well because you have direct contact with students and they're more active as opposed to doing it in a group. But if you want to, if it's too many for you, too many students in the class and you want to divide them into groups of 4, for WhatsApp, you can also do it that way, or you can have a group chat with your students and ask people to send audios. But of course, it needs to be done in a way where they actually respond to each other so that we know that they're processing the meaning of what they're hearing, not that they're just pushing play and okay, I'm finished. No, right? So there has to be some kind of interaction with them. How could it be monitored? That's another good question, Teresa. We can ask there's a lot of ways we can do this. We can ask the students to report on what they've learned or what they discussed. For example, if you tell them, okay, over the weekend, I want you to exchange like 10 audios with your partner, 5 and 5, yeah. On Monday, we're going to talk about your audios, what you learned from them or what you discussed. That's one way. Another way is for you to ask them to send you screenshots of the audios or to, I don't know, to upload them to a drive or something like that. Yeah, even though we don't have the proof that they're speaking in English, maybe we can ask them to upload one of the audios so you can hear it. Yeah, those are ways that we can monitor it. Okay. And any other examples that you guys have of ways to maximize listening in the classroom? What we don't want to do, though, is say something entirely in English and then translate it all into their native language. That we don't want to do. Why? Because there is no need for the student to process the English. If the student knows that everything you say in the classroom will be translated into their native language, they have no necessity to process the meaning of English. They will only wait for their native language and they will not process the English. So it's very important to not translate everything that we say to our students. If they need a little help or a minor detail translated, that's okay. But to translate the whole message is not productive for their English language acquisition. Yeah? Okay. Last but not least, I want to mention some free resources that we have. These are only a few. There are several more. And if you work with some free resources to work on listening, please share them with me and your colleagues in the chat as we go through these. So here we have a few. I basically copied and pasted the links here that will be shared also in the chat for you right now. And after the session, if you'd like to join me in the Zoom session, I can also share these links with you directly there. Starting with American English for Educators, this is a webpage that is produced by the Department of State of the United States. It's an outstanding webpage. It has a lot of really important resources. In this section where it's the 4 skills, we have at the very bottom, it says listening. We have recordings of actual texts, right? Books that are read out loud with activities of comprehension and things like that. Yeah. We have the British Council Learn English. This is a series of activities that are divided by level according to the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference, right? And here we have the website. We also have a lot of great resources on British Council. RELO, which is English Listening Lesson Library Online. These are all free resources, okay? This one is specifically designed for children. So if you work with smaller children, this page might be really good for you. It's divided again by the levels according to the Common European Framework of Reference. And here we have also the web address right here, okay? Okay, Voice of America Learning English. Here we also have material that is divided by levels according to beginner, intermediate, advanced, using real life scenes. Yeah, so we can work with actual, like they contextualize the listening a lot. For example, a car accident or a trip to the pharmacy or things like that. They're real life scenarios. Yeah, and here we have also the web address. Randall's ESL Cyber Listening Lab, which is made for individual study, more for individual study. So if you have students who want extra practice outside of the classroom, or you yourself, you can use this webpage here. It's pretty self-directed, yeah, self-directed learning. Okay, so here's the address as well. The International Dialects of English Archive. This one is really fascinating, and because of time, I can't share it with you right now during this webinar. But if you go to this webpage, I recommend this one specifically for your more advanced learners. So if any of you are working with B2 level of English or C1 maybe, or you're working with university, or you're working with students who study, like for example, my students are studying linguistics, this is a great website. When you go to this website, I will share it also in the Zoom session if you want to join me. It displays a map of the world, and there are red points in hundreds of places in the world, everywhere, not just in English-speaking countries, also in Peru, in Ecuador, in Argentina. There are places that you can click on those, and you can see that it will take you to a recording of someone speaking English in that part of the world. Super fascinating. So if you have more advanced learners, you can give them this as a homework assignment to explore the different varieties of English that exist, to find some that sound like the ones that they've learned in their classes, to find dialects that are very difficult for them to understand, to find dialects that sound beautiful to them, right? That they like a lot for whatever reason. It's a lot of fun for students to interact with this map, to get exposed to different ways of speaking English. In the recordings, you also have the demographic information. So we have the age, the gender, the socioeconomic class, because all of those things influence in the way that we speak. So this is also a really, really fun resource, and it's interactive for students to work with. Yes. Okay, that's great. I'm glad that you guys have a lot of a lot of resources from RELO. That's great. Chelsea, thank you. Breaking News English is another free site. Yes, thank you very much for that share. Loan, the Zoom session is at 3 o'clock today. In 20 minutes, the Zoom session starts. Okay, so we will start in 20 minutes with the Zoom session. And like I said, there are plenty of other resources. It's just I don't have time to go through all of them, but this is just a start. And to finish today, I would like to share this quote with Daniel Barenbaum, who was actually an Argentine conductor, musician, Argentine Spanish, yeah. And he said, in English, you have this wonderful difference between listening and hearing, and that you can hear without listening, and you can listen and not hear, which is true, right? We have those two verbs in English which do not mean exactly the same thing. And today we've been talking about listening specifically. So I hope that you are able to join me in 20 minutes at 3:00 p.m. Lima time. We will start with our Zoom session where we can interact more personally. Feel free to come and join me. The link will be posted on the Facebook page. Thank you very much for attending today's session. I hope you've enjoyed it and I hope you found it useful. And I look forward to seeing you again next month where our topic will be speaking. Take care, teachers. Goodbye.